Hello everyone. Tonight we will step into a dark moment in history, where your homeland is burned to ashes, your name is changed, and the person you love most could vanish in a ruthless, unannounced raid. This is not the story of Alexander the Great as you've heard it. This is your story. An unnamed Persian, caught between the triumph of an invader and the oblivion of history. And the truth is, if you survive a single day, you are already a miracle. Before you lean back comfortably, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy the content I share, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see people following from all over the world. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soft background noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. Tonight we step into an era more ancient than the dusty parchment scrolls in a museum, where molten gold could flow in streams, only to be poured onto ceilings, and a king's name could be longer than the map of his empire. But don't let the majestic columns and jade monuments fool you. This isn't the shimmering Persian dream of Hollywood's eye. No Aladdin, no flying carpets, and certainly no happy ending. This is Persepolis, the proud capital of the Achaemenid Empire, and you've just woken up here, in the spring of 331 BC. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, that could change very quickly. Now, before you start imagining yourself in a marble-tiled palace, adjust your expectations. You're not King Darius. You're not a queen, a general, or a high priest. You, a commoner. The kind not mentioned in history books, but who bears the brunt of every consequence. Your bed is a mat of dry straw and scraps of cloth, in a low-ceilinged, cramped room with cracked mud walls, where rats have as much right to roam as you do. Every morning, you wake to the blare of trumpets from the square, or the screams of a neighbor being taxed. No alarm clock, just the sun stabbing your eyes through a torn roof, and the smell of horse urine wafting from the main road. You stretch, your back aching, because sleeping on the ground and years of back-breaking labor spare no one. You're 25, but your body feels 60. You get up, step over the cold ashes of yesterday's fire, and dodge the puddle of rainwater leaking through the roof into the corner you thought was at least dry. There's no toilet in the house. You head to the alley behind, to the public pit shared with 3 other families, where every step is a survival game between mud, dung, and stray cows. But today, something's different. Not the smell. The smell's the same. A mix of kitchen smoke, horse manure, human sweat, and the ancient mustiness that's clung to your clothes and bones for generations. It's the air. It's heavier. You feel the guards' eyes on the city towers, taut like bowstrings. They're not shouting as usual. They're watching the horizon. Rumors spread faster than desert winds. Alexander, the western invader, whose sword is sharper than the gods' promises, is marching east. Persepolis hasn't been attacked yet, but it's only a matter of time. In the market, people whisper about the Battle of Gaugamela. The Persian army crushed. King Darius fled. Some say he's dead. Some say Alexander wields magic. You don't care what's true. You just know one thing. If the capital falls, you'll have nothing left to hold on to. Not even your life. You pass by the great palace, where columns rise like prayers from a white stone foundation. From afar, it looks like a miracle. But you're not allowed inside. People like you stand outside, gazing at reliefs that tell tales of royal glory, and knowing you're no part of it. While the king and his advisors debate surrender or death, you're arguing with the market woman over whether today's flatbread is moldy. The air is stifling, your stomach is empty, and your mind is tangled like the goddess Anahita's hair after a sandstorm. You try to stay calm, but that's as hard as finding a camel that can read. Everyone says the Persian Empire is great, that we built canals, grand roads, eternal sacred fires, and just laws. But laws don't shield you from Macedonian spears. Paved roads don't help you escape when the enemy comes. And sacred fires don't keep you warm when everything starts to collapse. In the afternoon, you hear news. The vanguard is nearing the province's border. Guards seal the gates. Wealthy citizens gather their riches and flee to the highlands. You've got a sack of dried grains and a goat skinnier than hope. Prices are soaring. Scammers line the alleys, selling anti-Alexander charms drawn in red ink on donkey hide. The priests say this is Ahura Mazda's test, but you see it as the outcome of ignorance, greed, and bitter fate. Night falls. Above Persepolis, The stars still shine, as if the universe couldn't care less about the life and death below. You lie down, your back against the cold floor, hearing the alarm trumpets echo from the eastern outpost. The neighborhood whispers, packs, waits, everyone waiting, no one knowing for what. And in that quiet moment, before it all burns, before the columns fall, before history calls Alexander the Great, and you nobody, you're just a person, trying to survive one more night in a city of dreams, slowly turning to ash. Welcome to Persepolis. Persepolis sounds like an ancient melody, a golden hymn, a place where you imagine lush hanging gardens, pools reflecting the moon, and corridors filled with ever-blooming Persian roses. But then you wake up, barefoot on cracked earth, and realize you don't live in the palace, you just live next to it. While above, marble domes shelter Emperor Darius, drinking wine with guests from India, Egypt, and Lydia. Below, right where you stand, is an open sewer clogged with dung, garbage, and a few dead cats. You're not invited to the grand Apadana Hall, with its hundreds of carved stone columns. You don't drink wine from golden goblets. You drink murky water from a clay jug, shared with 3 other families and a cow. Every day, you pass stone walls with reliefs of envoys bowing to the emperor, and you bow too, not out of loyalty, but because of the smell. The stench of human urine, goat dung, half-burnt kitchen smoke, and spoiled food, all blending into an ancient perfume you won't find in any history scroll. People often ask, how could the ancients build wonders like Persepolis? The answer, not you. The builders were slaves, migrant craftsmen, or prisoners of war. You, a native Persian commoner, don't touch sacred stone, don't climb scaffolding, aren't even allowed within an arm's length. You get to live in its great shadow, hoping it doesn't collapse on you. Your morning starts with a walk to the empty lot behind the house, designated as the public latrine. No stone-tilled toilet, no private loft, no faucet, just a big pit, a rotting wooden bucket, some scattered stones, and a leaning wall to pretend you have privacy. You don't yell "Gardilu" like later Europeans, because here, no one bothers to warn. Dung is tossed into gardens, onto streets, or just left there. In summer, flies swarm. In winter, the ground freezes, and you dig through ice colder than a noble's heart. Your house has no kitchen. The whole row shares a clay bread oven. Want to eat? Queue up. Want to bake? Beg. Want fire? Pray, or bribe with onions, worth as much as gold if you know the right market. Persians back then were famed for cleanliness in faith, but clean meant spiritual, not literal. You're taught to keep your body pure, avoid defiling fire, and not pollute sacred water. But that doesn't change the fact that you bathe once a week, if there's water, and when there is, you share it with the whole family. One basin passes from grandfather to grandchild, mother to child, from clean to only the gods know. Then you look toward the city's peak, where sunlight glints off limestone tiles, where white-robed priests perform rituals, where bull sacrifices last 3 days and nights, and no one from your neighborhood is invited. You hear ceremonial music drifting down, like a dream, with a soundtrack, but reality drowns it out with crying children, shouting neighbors, barking dogs, and the slap of palm leaf fans swatting flies. You wonder, do the palace people know we're out here shitting in pits full of maggots? Then you shrug. It doesn't matter. You still have to live, still have to haul water from a public well 3 streets away, still have to avoid drunk guards, still have to ignore a neighbor being dragged off by soldiers for carelessly bad-mouthing the king. You don't have the right to enter the palace. You just have the honor of watching it from afar. So, if your tap water runs weak today, remember your ancestors boiled river water, filtered it through old cloth, and hoped the fire god forgave them for using sacred flame to wash their feet. When you hear people say, Persepolis was the pinnacle of ancient civilization, remember, that's true, if you're the right class to step inside. But if you're you, you'll know the palace is indeed glorious. The toilet? Non-existent. Congratulations. After surviving a night of dung smells, flies, and apocalyptic dread, now you have to leave the house and work. Because even if Alexander is marching with his storm-like cavalry and spears gleaming like Greek myth, you still have to work. Your stomach doesn't wait for history, and your kids' mouths don't eat legends. You're a Persian citizen of an empire, stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, and you still have to scrape by daily with jobs later generations call traditional, but you call an endless chain of suffering. If you're a man, you might be a potter, blacksmith, shepherd, baker, or temple sweeper. If you're a woman, you might weave cloth, bake bread, shear sheep, carry babies, or pack goods for soldiers tired of their wives. Every job shares one trait: you sweat, you use your hands more than your brain, and you're paid with a handful of barley, or worse, a promise of priority when there's leftover food. You don't choose your job, it chooses you. Specifically, you do what your father did, unless you're exiled from the village or have a knack for fake prophecy. If you're a potter, you live with clay, your hands are cracked, your nails always black, and you breathe dust until you think you're part of the pot. If you're a farmer, you bend over for 14 hours a day in the sun, your hands calloused like stone, and you measure harvests by insect bites, not calendars. You don't plow for dreams of a bountiful crop. You plow because if you don't, you starve. And don't think merchants have it easy. Sure, they have donkeys, but they pay taxes at every city gate, face bribe demands from inspecting soldiers, and if their goods are robbed on the road, guess what? No one compensates. You're just told, don't take that road next time. If you're a shepherd, well, condolences. You live with sheep, sleep with sheep, breathe sheep stench, and sometimes get accused of loving sheep more than people. Every morning you lead the flock to the hills. Every evening you count them. Lose one, and you might lose a month's pay, or your chance at a wife. But there's one job that doesn't involve bending over. No dust inhalation, no penalties for tardiness. And the more nonsense you spew, the more you're paid. That's the profit. Yes, if you can roll your eyes, tremble your voice, and say vague things like fire will come from the west, or those who don't bow will be trampled by the winged one, you can trade a few cliches for a full meal and gasps of awe. You can wander the market with a staff, shouting prophecies, spitting colored water, banging a wooden drum, and declaring Alexander is Ahura Mazda's test to forge Persepolis' virtue. The vaguer, the holier, the more chaotic, the more revered. You might even be invited to the temple to judge if a white calf born today means the emperor will live another decade. You look at the calf, you nod, you say, it didn't birth, it's awaiting its time. People clap, you get more bread, but this job's dangerous. If you predict wrong, like saying Alexander will be struck by lightning, but he wins the next battle, you'll be charged with treason, stripped naked, and locked in a wooden barrel rolled around the city as midday entertainment. So, the golden rule: predict, but don't commit. Suggest, don't confirm, and always add, unless the stars shift. If you're honest, good at math, philosophically inclined, and speak 4 languages, sorry, you're still a commoner. You might write beautifully, or carve letters well, but you're only hired to etch tombstones, and the dead don't tip. The truth is, every job is misery, unless you know how to lie at the right time, place, and tone. In a world where war looms, truth is the easiest thing to bury. So, if you want peace, learn to stay silent. If you want to live well, say what others want to hear. And if you want to be rich, learn to spout nonsense without sounding too confident. Because in Persepolis, prophets live by faith and die by a prophecy off by a single season's wind. You live in an empire so vast that if you released a camel in Egypt, it could reach India before you finished your bread, if you even have bread. The Achaemenid Empire, or the Great Persia, stretches from the Mediterranean coast to the Indus River, from the Armenian mountains to the Arabian desert, a mighty network bound by roads, taxes, and mandatory oaths of loyalty. And you, a commoner, live in the capital, Persepolis, where everything should be abundant. But when mealtime comes, you look into your bowl and realize the map is vast, but your stomach is still empty. So what do you eat in an empire sprawling like a dream, when your meals are painfully real? Breakfast isn't exactly fresh. No nut milk, no coffee, and definitely no soft-boiled eggs with toast. You have one option: flat bread, called bread for dignity's sake. It's really a mix of barley flour, well water, and kitchen ash, baked with burnt edges on hot stones, dry as an unfulfilled prophecy. Sometimes it's sprinkled with black sesame, if you know someone at the market. Usually it isn't. You eat it with a bit of goat cheese, tasting like a rag used to wipe sweat all summer. Drink? Water if you're lucky. Otherwise, it's diluted pomegranate juice mixed with honey, stretched so thin, it's basically colored water. There's also beer, barley brewed, low in alcohol, but heavy on the gut, usually drunk at day's end, when you need a reason to forget the day's stench. At noon, you hope for stew, but most days, it's just vegetables. Not salad, boiled vegetables, or vegetables boiled so long, no one remembers what they were. You dip your bread, take a bite, chew thoroughly, and swallow with ancestral resignation. Big festival days, there's meat, but you don't touch it. That's for nobles, priests, or soldiers rewarded for killing someone worthier than you. You might get meat water, meaning broth, faintly brown, possibly having passed near a piece of meat. You've heard tales of merchants from India bringing rice, spices, saffron, pepper, but those go to the palace or the rich. You get broken rice, more husk than grain, cooked into a gluey clump. Lamb, the dream of every household, might appear at weddings, funerals, or when a sheep is too sick to save. Either way, you eat fast, not because it's delicious, but because flies get there first. Dinner? Depends if you survive the day. If you do, it's back to bread. Now harder, gone cold, dipped in mashed beans or pickled onions. If you're especially lucky, say, not fined for missing a ritual, you might get dried fish, not from the sea, but a nearby river, dried until you're unsure if you're eating flesh or gnawing a plank. Spices? Oh, who do you think you are? An Egyptian noble. Saffron, anise, cinnamon, pepper, all cost as much as a life. A pinch of pepper is worth a good pair of sandals. You season with salt, if you have it, or tears if you don't. Sometimes you dream of eating like the emperor. Octopus rice, pomegranate wine, saffron marinated venison, raisins, roasted chestnuts, date cakes. But then you wake to a growling stomach and a pot of porridge more scorched than a guard's promise to share this week's rations. You don't eat for pleasure, you eat to survive. And when you hear later historians say, Persians had one of the richest cuisines of the ancient world, you'd laugh, dry as twice-baked bread. Because yes, the empire spans from Egypt to India, but your stomach is filled with what even goats refuse. And you keep eating, because whether soldier, king, or commoner, everyone chews. Only for you, every meal is a joke, just not a funny one. This morning, you said something simple to your neighbor. If only King Darius cared more about fighting than building stone statues, we'd be better off. You laughed. Your neighbor didn't. 3 hours later, 2 satrap guards knock on your door. Not a polite knock, a knock reminding you that in this empire, stone can be carved into law, and your words can be carved onto your own tombstone. You're dragged to the market in broad daylight, kneeling before the crowd you queued with for water last night. A scribe asks, "Did you slander the king?" You stammer, saying you don't recall. Instantly, a stick longer than your tax list strikes your back. In the Persian Empire, free speech is a concept reserved for no one. Laws are countless, and their enforcement depends on the enforcer's mood. Some days, you can call your goat dumb as a guard, and everyone laughs. Other days you say, the sky's as gloomy as an empty palace, and you're jailed for suspected royal insult. Most of the time, you don't know what's forbidden, because laws are stored in archives, and you can't read. Even if you could, no one lets you in. Even if you got in, the laws are written in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian cuneiform, understood only by priests and a few night owls, so you live by instinct. Listen much, speak little, bow to soldiers, nod to soothsayers, stay silent before long-bearded men in white robes. They could be priests, officials, or spies. No one knows, and you don't need to, because knowing is useless. The empire's rule is an inverted pyramid maze. The higher up, the fewer hold power, and the more lurk below to watch you. You're always at the bottom. Each satrap, provincial governor, is a petty king. They hold life and death power, tax rights, and the ability to change laws on a sunny day's whim. A complaint about taxes, a joke about Alexander's armor, or even a mistimed eyebrow raise can make you vanish overnight. No one asks, no one answers. You're only remembered when your dog, unfed, barks madly in the neighborhood. The only thing you can say freely is a prayer. But even then, it must follow the right ritual, face the right direction, be at the right hour, and never mix up the gods' names. Calling Ahura Mazda, Mithra, is enough for a charge of heretical deviation, a crime added last year after someone accidentally burned a temple. If you're a woman, silence is your only choice. Speaking much is dangerous. Speaking right is luck. Speaking wrong, better learn to breathe through a gag. Even children learn early to hold their tongues. Your 4-year-old son knows to bow when an armored man passes. Your 6-year-old daughter has memorized 12 gods' names and 8 blessings, not for rituals, but to dodge punishment. You heard of a man in the next village who joked, "Alexander may be handsome, but he's no match for a Persian beard." The next morning, he was conscripted for Alexander's army, called turning punishment into tribute. A week later, his body was seen on a salt cart. No one dared ask. Passing his corpse, you bow as if it's a fallen leaf. So you learn to say safe things. The king is the sun. The satrap is the arm of justice. Greeks are great, but no match for our faith. When you don't know what to say, talk about the weather. Hot, rainy, gloomy, all harmless, as long as you don't blame the regime for a drought. Of course, there are brave ones. Some resist, write manifestos, carve poems on stone, whisper of freedom. But not you. You have a family. You owe bread. You have a pregnant goat. And you want to survive this winter. You're not a hero. You're just sensible, in a world where what's right and what's dangerous can be the same. So, if you survive today, remember, it's not because you're strong. It's because you know when to stay silent. Sometimes surviving is a form of resistance, quiet, ruthless, and enduring. But always remember, in this empire, every day could be your last, if you say the wrong thing. If you lived in the Persian Empire during its golden age, faith wasn't a personal choice. It was the air you breathed, the fire you couldn't extinguish, the whisper you had to memorize even in your sleep. Because here, religion wasn't just in the temples, it was in how you washed your hands, cooked your food, even how you buried the dead, or rather how you didn't bury them. Your faith, if you were a proper Persian, was Zoroastrianism, the dualistic belief in light versus darkness. Sounds abstract, but it's clearer than a glass of pomegranate juice in summer. There's Ahura Mazda, the god of light, truth and order, and there's Achaemenid, the force of darkness, chaos, and deceit. Your life was a spiritual battlefield between these forces, and you were caught in the middle, sweaty, disoriented, and still baking bread for your kids. Fire was sacred. Fire was truth incarnate. So, you never let garbage fall into the hearth. No spitting into the fire. No urinating on it. Do that, and expect to be burned for real. If your house had an oil lamp burning all night, you didn't blow it out. You gently pushed the wick down with a stick. Mess up, and neighbors would point, priests would visit, and bad luck would hit faster than land taxes. You prayed every morning, facing the rising sun, arms slightly spread, trying to recall the gods' titles in the right order. One wrong word was a sin. Forgetting a ritual was a sin.
Joking during a ceremony.
A death sentence, or at least a whipping with a bronze-tipped lash. Even if you weren't that devout, you still did it all, because no one asked, "Do you believe?" They asked, "Have you done it?" The dead weren't buried. The earth was sacred. You couldn't defile it with corpses. Your loved ones' bodies, even your dearest, were taken to the towers of silence, barren stone hills where vultures ate them. Then, the remains were swept into lime pits. You didn't wail too loudly, didn't keep their hair, didn't wear mourning clothes. Everything had rules. Some said vultures were Ahura Mazda's messengers, eating flesh to free the soul. Others whispered, "I still wish I could bury my mother in the garden." But they didn't say it loudly. Speaking up was an offense against the gods and the state. Fire temples were the spiritual heart. You couldn't enter unless you were a man, ritually cleansed, and hadn't cursed in 3 days. Women during menstruation couldn't approach. Children under 7 weren't spiritually aware enough. Sneeze in the temple. You'd bow deeply to apologize. To the fire. Marriage was sacred too, but not romantic. You might marry your cousin. You might take a second wife. As long as you preserved the pure lineage and didn't wed a heretic. A woman marrying an outsider was deemed a disruptor of cosmic order. or simply a sinner. Religion ruled meals too. Meat had to be ritually slaughtered. Water had to come from an untouched source. Bread had to be baked with dung-free wood. Once you ate grilled goat without checking who killed it, result you were cut from the temple's charity list all winter. You couldn't argue. Cleansing a defiled soul required 3 months of fasting and chanting. You tried it. Conclusion: starvation. Not everyone kept the faith purely. Some attended rituals out of fear. Some mumbled prayers while thinking of grain debts. Some only lit fires on major holidays. But everyone pretended well enough. No one wanted to be called one who belongs to darkness. In a society where light was law, living in darkness was a declaration of war. Religion was also politics. Priests were moral overseers. They could advise a satrap to divorce his wife over a bad dream. They could propose punishing a whole village for one person's ritual mistake. Got a grudge? Easy. Whisper that someone didn't wash their hands before entering the temple. Small accusation, big consequences. But to be fair, religion was also comfort. When you lost a child to fever, you believed they were carried to the light. When crops failed, you prayed Ahura Mazda would cleanse the village's sins. When the sun rose after gloomy days, you felt forgiven. And that's why, despite a system that choked every breath, you kept bowing, clasping hands, chanting, partly from fear of punishment, partly because you needed to believe some light, however distant, however abstract, was still watching you. So, faith back then wasn't black or white, but a smoldering red flame, half light, half embers. And you lived between those hues, trembling yet hopeful. At first, you heard the name Iskandar from Western merchants, mouths talking, hands counting silver, eyes stealing glances at Persepolis girls, always exaggerating to sell another dyed cloth or stinking perfume jar. They said Iskandar was a young man, blonde, sharp-eyed, riding like the god Mithra incarnate, winning every battle, making all of Asia Minor tremble like a goat about to be sheared. You scoffed. A young upstart from a filthy place like Macedonia, threatening an empire stretching to India. Absurd, well. But the news kept coming, not by letters, but through sweat and fear. A caravan attacked in the Syrian desert.
Envoys never returning.
Salt prices doubling because rumors say Greek troops are looting riverbank stores. Then came the news that silenced Persepolis Granicus, a small river in the northwest. A battle thought trivial. But then came Issus, then Tyre, then Gaza. Alexander, or rather the human nightmare, wasn't just defeating Darius's armies. He was marching east like a dry wind over burning grasslands. He didn't slow.
He didn't tire.
He didn't stop to admire the view. Every city he passed was a tear in the empire's map. And you, still a commoner, still selling pickled melons at the market, still thought Persepolis is untouchable. But with every rumor, goods got pricier, and you skipped meals to buy candles in case the fire went out.
Or in case you needed to pray urgently.
Market soothsayers got busier. They set up small tables, scattered wood chips, tossed grains, and declared, Iskandar is sent by the gods to test Persian hearts. You paid 2 handfuls of barley to ask, will he reach Persepolis? The soothsayer looked at the chips, then at you, and whispered,
Wherever you go.
The wind follows. You didn't understand, but your neck felt cold. At the fire temple, priests proclaimed, this is a time of trial. The faithful will be saved by light. But in your home, the oil lamp dimmed. Light couldn't fill an empty stomach. The next day, guards doubled. City gates closed early. A group of wealthy residents slipped away at night, leaving empty houses and rumors that the emperor is preparing to retreat to Ecbatana. You asked your neighbor, is it true? She looked at you like you were already dead.
Haven't you heard?
Darius lost again, this time at Gaugamela. Gaugamela, just a dry plain. But after that battle, the empire was nearly headless. Darius fled. Alexander marched straight to Babylon. You started waking at night, soaked in cold sweat. Not from fear, but from not knowing what scared you more, the enemy or your own court's silence. The city still lived on the surface, but no one sang. No one laughed. People walked faster, spoke less. Temples burned fires all night, not for worship, but for watch. You heard whispers that Alexander wasn't just a general. He was a new king. He let cities stay free. He spared temples. He didn't rape women. He gave bread to children. Sounded like a fairy tale. But every fairy tale starts with a stranger entering the village. A week later, you saw a group of strangers on horseback past the outskirts. Blonde hair, gleaming armor. You bowed instinctively. They did nothing. They just looked. One spoke in a foreign tongue, then laughed. You didn't understand, but you saw one thing clearly. They weren't afraid of you. They weren't afraid of this city. They weren't afraid of anything. That's when you knew the story you once thought was a merchant's joke had truly begun. And you weren't the hero. You were just a witness. Or worse, a backdrop to a tragedy you had no power to rewrite. And like every classic tragedy, when the hero enters, everyone else is left as a supporting role or a corpse. You've packed everything you can carry. A sack of dried grains, a dull knife, a bundle of old cloth, holding 3 silver coins and a broken bracelet. The only thing left from your mother. You heeded your cousin, once a warehouse guard. Go, if you want to live. Alexander has passed the Pasargadae gates. No one can stop him now. So you go, not out of bravery, out of fear. But this fear isn't like fear of the dark or snakes. It's a slowing heartbeat, cold palms, and legs that move even when your mind doesn't know where to go. You're not alone. The southern road, out of Persepolis, is bursting. People walk, cows plod, horses trot, rickety wooden carts creak under piles of grain baskets and clinging children. No one speaks. No one cries. Just the sound of footsteps and wheels grinding gravel. You hope to reach some distant village where Macedonian hooves haven't trod, where no one knows you, where you can plant an onion patch and start over. But you quickly realize you can't outrun hooves, especially not Macedonian cavalry. Riders fused to their saddles, charging like wind, appearing like ghosts. You're fleeing war, but war doesn't need to chase you. It's already ahead. 3 days after leaving the city, you see dust on the horizon, not a sandstorm. The vanguard, bronze helmets gleaming, spears longer than your childhood. They thunder down the slope like lightning. No arrows, no shouts. They don't need them. The hooves and speed are their death sentence. You dive off the road, slide down a stream bank, crawl into bushes. Your heart pounds like festival drums. Your eyes stay shut. You hear hooves flash by, swords clank against saddles, children scream, then silence. A silence cold to the bone. When you crawl out, you see an overturned cart, a broken wheel, scattered grain, and a cow gasping with a gash in its neck. No human bodies, just a child's scarf, caked in dust. You keep going, not because you want to, because going back offers nothing. Then you see them again. A patrol, 4 men, short cloaks, plumed helmets, speaking a tongue you've only heard from merchants. But now it's commands. One points at you. You don't wait. You run. Run like your feet aren't yours. Run like the universe is chasing you. But human legs don't beat horse hooves. They don't need to stab. They just surround. When they stop in front of you, you're too spent to scream. You raise your hands, not to surrender, to brace for a blow. But no blow comes. They just look. One says something, then laughs. He hands you a water skin. You hesitate. He nods. You drink and nearly choke on water so cool it's alien. He turns away, doesn't kill, doesn't capture, just leaves. But in their eyes you see it. They don't see you as an enemy. They don't see you as a person either. You're just a trifle, like a cricket hopping off the road, like a pebble under hooves. Your existence isn't worth their concern, and that's the scariest part. You lived in an empire where the king's shadow covered the people, where religion ruled meals and death. But now you're in a desert. No king, no gods, no protection. And those about to rule you don't need to be angry, because you're not worth their anger. You keep walking, not knowing where, only that Macedonian cavalry are ahead, behind, and in your mind. You can run, but you can't escape. Not from hooves, not from history, not from the truth that you're living in the opening page of a story where you're never the hero. And next time hooves approach, there may be no water skin, just dust and blood. You don't recall the exact moment you were caught. Maybe when you strayed from the group on a sun-scorched plain. Maybe when you paused to drink from a wooden trough by a guard post. Or maybe when you stared too long at a Macedonian shaving in this new empire. A wrong glance is enough to make you vanish. They didn't ask your name, didn't ask your hometown, didn't ask if you agreed. They just handed you a basket, a torn tunic, and pointed to the camp. From that moment, you were no longer a fugitive. You were logistics, part of the massive machine, Alexander brought to conquer the world, a machine needing food, water, wood, tents, salt, rags, ropes, sharpening stones, and people to carry it all. A day in the logistics camp has no heroic drums, no martial training, no fine uniforms, or promises of glory. It starts before dawn, when the ground's colder than the Thessalian commander, who barks, time P4 paw, before you can rub your eyes. You rise in a half-cloth, half-straw tent.
Shared with 5 others.
An Egyptian, a Syrian, a Bactrian speaking a tongue no one understands, and an old man with one eye who knows exactly how to wrap beef to last 3 days. You don't talk much. Here, silence means survival. First task, light fires, not for cooking, but to heat animal hides for tent pegs. If you're slow, you're yelled at. If you burn them, you're beaten. Next, water distribution. Haul from the well, pour into leather vats, ration by soldier count, not logistics workers. Thirsty? Drink later. Tired? Keep working. Bleeding feet from walking? Add rags. Tie tight. Step on. After water, it's dung duty. Yes, horse dung, donkey dung, mule dung, human dung, the sacred mix that keeps the invincible army running smoothly. You scrape piles with a wooden shovel, toss them out, burn them if it's windy, bury them if it's calm. The smell clings to your hands all day. By mealtime, you taste only ash and sweat. At noon, if there's time, you eat. Eat as polite. It's chewing burnt bread with salt meat harder than bricks. If you know someone in the kitchen, you might beg bean broth. If not, you swallow dry and pray for afternoon. Afternoon is transport. Tents, wood, spears, flags, armor, oil barrels, axes, pots, bread baskets, sometimes dead soldiers. Each item weighs dozens of pounds, and you carry in teams. If someone falls, the team stops. Not out of pity. If you drop cargo, the commander punishes everyone. You saw a man's arm broken for smashing a wine jug. No one remembers his name. You just remember the wine, soaking your bread, making it soft for the first time in weeks. At night, you don't sleep right away. You douse fires, retie tent ropes, check inventory, miss even one dull knife, and you're accused of theft. Punishment is being tied to a flagpole until your skin burns with the sunset. When you lie down, everything still moves. Guards change shifts. Horses neigh. Oil lamps sway in the wind. You look at the moon and remember your home. Straw roof, barley bread scent. Your little brother singing hymns off key. It's all 1,000 miles away now, and no one knows you're here. No one searches. No one asks. You're logistics. Not a soldier. Not a slave. Not free. Just a silent cog in a conquest you never asked to join. And you know tomorrow will be like today, unless the alarm horn sounds. Then you're the first to clear bodies, not to honor them, to make room for more tents, because logistics must be tidy, even in hell. You didn't see the first flame, only the sky behind you turn a deep orange, as if the sunset were being burned alive. The smell of smoke swept in with the wind, before any rumors. At first you thought it was just a soldier's camp cooking meat, or a temple torched by someone worshipping the wrong god, not uncommon these days. But then screams rose from the west, where Persepolis once stood proud, like a jewel in the desert's heart. You climbed a mound, heart pounding like it might burst, and saw it, Persepolis, your empire's capital, ablaze, not a smoldering fire, not a few commoners' huts, the whole city burning, limestone roofs collapsing, century-old stone columns snapping like matchsticks, carved relief walls swallowed by flames, taller than spears, and amidst it all, figures danced, drunk and shouting. Macedonian soldiers, the ones you thought were emotionless machines, were feasting on your empire's ashes. Some say Alexander ordered the fire, some say it was an accident after a victory feast. Others whisper an Athenian dancer murmured in his ear that this place must be purged for burning our homeland. But you don't need a reason. All you know is, you have no home. The small mud house where you hid seeds under bricks. The corner wall scratched with your child's name. The wool blanket your mother wove when she was alive. All ash, nothing to return to. You see others, those who fled earlier, now returning only to wail like wild beasts. A woman clutches a pile of ash, pulling out a charred doorframe, whispering, "It's still here, it's still here." An old man sits on broken stones, muttering ancestors' names as if summoning their aid, but smoke has swallowed his voice. You stand in a field of ash and ruin, smelling burnt wood, stone, and human flesh. Some bodies didn't escape. Some died from smoke, hands still clutching a pot, a cloth, or a small clay idol once kept for worship. You don't know whether to cry or vomit. There's no water to vomit, no tears left either. You walk through the ashes, hoping to find a trace of your old life, a brick with a carving, a bowl, an oil lamp. You find a cracked pottery shard, split in two, not valuable, but you keep it, because right now, holding on to something is holding on to a piece of your soul. Alexander is somewhere in a distant camp. They say he's sad, that he didn't mean to burn the whole city, that he wept, seeing flames reach the libraries, but a king's tears can't cool molten stone, and even if he cries all night, you're still the one who lost everything. Macedonian guards stand on hills, overlooking the ruins, smoking pipes, chewing bread, laughing. To them, this is a triumph. To you, it's the end of the world. They speak a language you haven't learned, but their eyes say clearly, I don't care. You wonder, did anyone say we'll be immortal when laying Persepolis' first stone? Did anyone believe it would stand forever? Did anyone think those towering columns would kneel to fire like begging captives? You don't know, but you know this. Nothing stands forever against fire. Not palaces, not myths, not childhoods, not you. You leave the ashes as the sun sets. Not because you want to go, because you can't bear standing there, no longer part of it. You were once a Persepolitan. Now you're a wanderer in an empire that raised you, now devoured by men who eat, laugh, and burn. You bow your head, clutch the pottery shard, and walk. Each step crunches ash beneath your feet. No one calls you back, because back is gone. Persepolis has burned, and you have no home. You return to the camp in silence, still gripping the blackened pottery shard from Persepolis' ashes like a talisman, though you know no gods are listening anymore. That night, as you chew a piece of mystery meat and force it down with rainwater pooled in a rock crevice, the Macedonians throw a feast. They laugh loudly, tell stories in smooth Greek like flowing oil, raising wine cups to the sky as if thanking their gods for a warm dinner atop another civilization's ruins. One sings, off-key but loud, about victory, horses, honor. Another mimics a Persian bow, bending low, hand on chest, saying, "At your service, Lord," in a high-pitched, mocking tone. The group roars with laughter. You don't laugh. None in the logistics crew laugh. The Egyptian quietly breaks his bread and shares it with a lost child. The Syrian sits close to the coals, back to the fire. Another Persian, older, hair grey, stares at the distant ruins, as if memorizing every lost contour. While you and those like you bow your heads to loss, Alexander sits in a gold-draped tent, writing, not letters to his mother, not a diary mourning the city he burned. He's writing history, not your history, not Persepolis' story, his, what he saw, what he wants posterity to remember. Starting with how he was merciful to locals, spared the surrendered, respected temples, dressed like a native. An Alexander who honors Eastern culture. An Alexander who liberates, not invades. An Alexander who loves civilization, philosophy, poetry, art, and the fire that burned Persepolis. He'll write it was a fleeting mistake, a moment of anger, a drunken accident, a blemish on the grand map he's drawing with his sword. Not planned, not politics, just a moment of weakness. But you know better. You saw the fires lit, saw soldiers take orders, saw wine poured. You heard cheers as the first palace roof collapsed. You saw eyes gleaming like predators in the flames. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A message in fire to the whole empire. The old is dead. The new is rewriting everything. You lived in a civilization with history carved in stone, written in 3 languages, stored in archives and temples. Now you live in an empire where history is told by word of mouth, passed from soldier to soldier, from wine jug to feast, from victory songs to epic poems you'll never join. The Macedonians will say Alexander didn't destroy Persepolis, didn't kill civilians, that Persians welcomed them as saviors. They'll paint him as a new Heracles, a reborn Achilles, a demigod worthy of touching the horizon. And you're a witness. Not because you're asked, because you can't forget. You'll tell your children, if you live to have them, that you saw your empire burn at night, that you saw soldiers laugh on your ancestors' graves, that you saw the victor write a new story in ink made of blood and ash, and your children will listen. Later, they may doubt, they may forget, but the truth will linger under your fingernails, in your throat, in nightmares you can't recount. You have no right to write history, but you live in it. And the most painful part isn't losing your home, your people, your city. It's knowing that one day, someone will rewrite this story and erase your name as if you never existed. The Macedonians laugh. The Persians weep. Alexander rewrites history. And you try to remember, though no one asks you to tell. That morning, you weren't woken by an alarm drum, but by a voice, familiar yet strange, ringing out in the camp square. From now on, all name lists must be written in the royal language. The royal language, meaning Greek. From that day, every wooden board, market sign, letter, proclamation, inventory log, payroll list, even memorial stone inscriptions, everything had to be in the language you'd only heard from the mouths of conquerors. Babylonian cuneiform, erased, Old Persian, discarded, Elamite, too complex. From now on, only the script of civilization. So you start learning, not for love of knowledge, but for survival. To follow orders correctly, to know who's just been conscripted, to avoid a beating for mispronouncing tax deadlines. You pick up words from the wind. Stratos is army. Demos is people. Sitaphoros is grain distributor. Basileus is king. And Alexandros, the name of the man rewriting everything you knew, is the first word you must pronounce perfectly. No more Iskander, as Persians called him. No more foreign king. No more invader. Now you must say Alexandros ho megas, Alexander the Great, with perfect intonation, full respect, in front of guards, during anthems, or at state-organized prayers. The camp children learn faster than you. They play games in Greek, sing rhymes, teaching eyes, duo, trace, and call you papos, instead of barber. You're both sad and scared, because change doesn't come by sword, it comes by alphabet lessons, by new commands, by posted orders at the bread station, and then your name changes too. You're Ardashir, an ancient name, carrying ancestral pride. Now on the food workers list, you're Artaserkas, then shortened to Arta, then morphed into Aristos, because it sounds less Persian. When you protest, the scribe shrugs. It's just a name. But you know a name isn't just a name. It's roots, it's your mother's call. It's what your father carved inside a clay drum when you turned 10. It's how your beloved whispered to you under a straw roof before war tore everything apart. Misread a word, punished. Miswrite a letter, mocked. Mispronounce Alexandros. Glared at like an ungrateful barbarian. Each day, a small part of you is replaced. Each week, you think less in your old tongue. Each month, you forget a word, maybe for your village's old goat, or the smell of festival bread, no longer baked, the scariest part. You're not sure you remember how to say those old things right anymore. When you try your mother tongue, your lips stiffen, sounds distort, listeners don't understand, and you feel ashamed. Not because you're mocked, because you feel foreign to yourself. Sometimes you wonder, is this integration becoming global or just erasure? When you hear children laugh in the new language, you feel both pain and relief. They won't be beaten for mispronouncing. They'll live easier in this new world. But they won't remember Persepolis, won't read stone carvings, won't know how many hymns the Ahura Mazda ritual needs. They'll say their parents' names with a different accent, and they'll call Alexander the Builder, not the Burner. You don't hate them, but you feel lost, like a shadow between two suns, one extinguished, the other cold. You can't go back, you can't stay the same. You can only keep speaking, keep repeating, keep learning new words, even as you recite old ones in your heart, cracked, distorted, fading. When someone asks, "Where are you from?" you say, "From Persepolis." They ask, "What's that?" And you whisper, softly, "A real city," before it was rewritten with an easier name. You thought you'd grown used to absurdity, living without a home, eating without meat, sleeping without peace. But then Alexander, or rather, Alexandros Ho Megas, king of kings, conqueror of east and west, declared he wasn't just a king, he was Zeus's son, Zeus Ammon, to be precise. A Greek-Egyptian god hybrid with a long beard, boundless power, and a peculiar fondness for adopting royal heirs. The news spread like salt on the Persian Empire's wounds. From camps to markets, from scribes to water carriers, everyone had to learn a new phrase: "Long live the divine emperor, son of Zeus Ammon." And you, who once worshipped fire and whispered to Ahura Mazda, now had to bow to a flesh and blood man and call him a god's heir. The first time you heard the new ritual, you thought it was a joke, a lavish ceremony where Alexander, in a white robe and golden crown, stood on a marble court under blazing sun, receiving blessings from Greek, Egyptian, and most painfully bribed Persian priests. They bowed, hands raised, praising the god-king among men, while you stood at the edge, choking on dust and rage. No one asked if you believed. Belief was no longer sacred, it was duty. Every citizen had to attend monthly rituals to honor the divine lineage of the Supreme One. Miss it, and your name was noted. Miss 3, and you vanished. You once thought religion was a matter of the heart. Now you learned hearts could be shaped like hot metal, with enough whips and forced hymns. You learned to kneel without trembling, to chant without biting your lip, to stare at Alexander's statue holding a thunderbolt without gagging. And the strangest part, some started believing. An old neighbor who once told tales of Anahita now hung Alexander's portrait by her door, lighting candles nightly. A soothsayer began channeling Zeus's messages through Persian winds. Children sang hymns to the father of the East. And for a moment, you saw the old world didn't need violence to be buried. It willingly faded, word by word, symbol by symbol, face by face. You don't dare resist. Resisting a king who claims godhood isn't rebellion, it's blasphemy. And here, blasphemy gets no grave. Still, a fire burns in you, not holy anymore, but a small, stubborn, aching ember. You don't need anyone to affirm what you know. Alexander isn't a god, he's a man who fights, persuades, rewrites the past with florid script, but still a man, with blood, with sweat, with ambition so vast, he needs immortality to feel secure. A man who kills and burns cities, then calls it divine will. A man who vanishes in wine and feasts, then demands to be called angel. And you, what do you call him? In public, holy emperor, alone with the wind, a lonely man trying to convince the world he doesn't fear death. But you still clasp hands, still bow, still recite prayers, because survival isn't glory. It's a chain of compromises until you forget what you once refused. And every time you hear someone whisper, "He's truly a god," you wonder, do they believe? Or are they, like you, just trying to survive in an empire where gods are chosen by royal decree? It doesn't matter anymore, because since Alexander claimed to be Zeus's son, your world officially entered an era of man-made myth. And you, Persian commoner, are no longer a witness. You're the stage, the background noise in a hero's epic, written and sung by the victor. And like all stages, you're only allowed to stay silent, look up, and clap. Though in your heart you know gods don't ride horses, and a god's father doesn't laugh while burning Persepolis. You sit among the crowd, listening to a child sing a new song of Alexandros's victory, each word cutting into your memory like a gentle knife. The one who brought light to the east, who opened the gates of truth, the father of all peoples. The child sings in Greek, clear, unflinching, unlike their mother, who once taught them Zoroastrian prayers each morning before the fire altar. You look at that small, radiant, carefree face, and for a moment you see yourself. Not now, but when you were young, when Persepolis still stood, when your father was alive, and told you of Cyrus the Great like a living saint, when your mother lit incense on the first of the month, and washed her hands with sacred spring water. Now what? The temple is destroyed, the stone bearing your family's name replaced by new statues, the language you spoke now a mark of suspicion, and your name, Ardashir, shortened to Ari for convenience. Each day you wake in a world where you must think before speaking. which language, which words, which direction to pray, which titles to use, and what to avoid saying that could be misheard. Sometimes you catch yourself in a mirror and flinch. Who's that? A Persian holding on to their roots, a survivor through submission, or just a shadow, a silent witness to an era you haven't grasped before it swept you away. You don't know anymore. Those who lived like you now fall into three types. Some embrace the new empire, wear Greek clothes, study Greek philosophy, take new names, and open schools teaching Greek poetry to their children. They say the past is a burden, the future an opportunity. Others flee to the mountains, to villages, staying silent, keeping worship fires in hidden jars, secretly teaching their children the old tongue at night, writing old Persian on stones and hiding them under mats. They live like ghosts, clinging to heritage, like the dead, grasping their graves. And you're in between, not brave enough to flee, not false enough to believe. You work for the Greeks, keep records in two scripts, attend rituals in two traditions, keep a blank face when children call Alexander the god from the west. But at night, you secretly light a stick, close your eyes, and whisper prayers you no longer fully recall. You once thought you were Persian. Now, what does that mean? Carrying the blood of a fallen dynasty, speaking a replaced language, worshipping outdated gods, remembering cities that are gone, mourning those who knelt but weren't spared. You thought you were a child of light, by the old faith. Now you see only smoke, and every time you ask, "Who am I?" the answer recedes like a desert mirage. But you're not empty. You have memories, ears that heard the crashes. The Greeks will never record in their histories. Eyes that saw desperate faces before Persepolis's flames. Hands that trembled signing a food list with a name not your own. And a heart, still capable of pain, each time someone laughs about the docile eastern tribes. Yes, you don't know who you are anymore, but you know this. You were there. When language was banned, when names were changed, when gods were replaced, when history was rewritten, you saw, you heard, you survived. And sometimes, amid all the chaos, that alone is a declaration. Because even if they try to make you forget who you are, as long as you remember what you saw, they haven't fully won. You don't know who you are anymore, but you know you're still here, and you're waiting, not to restore the old empire, not for revenge, but to tell someday, when someone will listen, when truth needs remembering, even if only in a whisper at night. It didn't start with a glance or grand words, but with a cup of water pressed into your hand in the scorching midday when you were hauling grain sacks for the Macedonian camp stores and nearly collapsed in the yard. He said nothing, just gave you water, then left. You didn't have time to thank him, but you remember that face, not for beauty, but because it didn't sneer, didn't see you as a walking tool, a hauler, a mute. A week later, you saw him again while fetching the meat distribution list. He nodded, you nodded back. No one smiled, but something quietly sparked in those nods. He was a Macedonian soldier, an archer, named Theros. You learned that by asking the kitchen guard discreetly. Theros spoke softly. His hands didn't reek of blood. His steps didn't clang like hammers. He often gazed east at sunset over the camp. Like you, just someone thrown into this conquest. Not to choose sides, but to serve a man who'd already chosen everything. Encounters piled up like sand on your sandals, at the water post, gathering firewood, sorting the supply shed. Brief words, short, simple. You weren't fluent in Greek. He didn't know Persian, too, but strangely, you understood each other, not through words, through glances, breaths, and a silence that didn't feel distant. Zhu. Then one day, he gave you a wrist wrap, the kind archers use. You didn't understand. He just placed it in your palm, smiled, and touched your shoulder lightly. That was when your hands trembled. You knew this was wrong. Wrong in the eyes of both Macedonians and the remaining Persians around you. Zhu! To them, soldiers fight, and commoners like you bow. To them, a Persian and a conquering soldier can't walk the same path, let alone share a heartbeat. But feelings don't consult history. They slip in during shift changes, brief glances, silent greetings in the dark. And one day, you sat beside him, behind the kitchen, sharing leftover bread, saying nothing, just looking at the sky, and you knew you were in love. Not the poetic kind, but the kind where you cling to a fragment of the world left, a small, fragile, but real piece. Some nights, you followed him to the hill behind the camp, where only grass and wind existed. He drew your name in the sand in Greek. You wrote his, in old cuneiform. You both laughed. Neither understood the other's script. But you knew that moment was untouchable, not by the commander, not by Alexander, not by history. But love in wartime has no refuge. One day, you were summoned for questioning. Someone saw you with Theris. They asked, "What secrets are you hiding?" You said nothing. They asked, "Are you a spy?" You laughed, though no one else in the room did. Then they beat you. Not much, but enough to show it wasn't a joke. You didn't tell Theris, but he knew. He touched the bruise on your back, his eyes no longer calm. He was angry, not because you were hit, but because you were hit for loving. A few days later, you didn't see him anymore. They said he was sent east for a campaign. Some said he was demoted, others said he volunteered to go. You didn't ask. No one spoke.
And you weren't allowed to ask.
But each night, sitting alone behind the camp, you hold the wrist wrap he gave you, now worn, fraying, nearly torn. You don't cry. Tears won't bring him back. You just close your eyes and whisper the name you called him, a name not in the army rolls, not in the Empire's lists, a name only you two knew. And in that moment, you're not Persian, not a subject, not a witness. You're just someone who loved in the wrong place, the wrong time, but truly. And for you, that's enough. The news came on a sweltering morning as you split firewood behind the grain store, sweat soaking through your torn tunic, hands aching as if your bones were rotting from within. A messenger rode through the camp gate from the west, dust swirling, shouting in Greek you couldn't fully grasp. But one word stood out: Alexandros, and another, Thanatos. Dead. Alexander was dead. No one believed it at first. Guards shook their heads, saying it was just a fever. A salt trader claimed it was an internal coup. An old woman whispered it was a good omen, that Ahura Mazda was finally done with silence. But you stood still, hand frozen on the axe handle, eyes staring into the distance. You didn't cheer, didn't rejoice, didn't cry. You just felt cold, strangely cold under the scorching sun, because you knew sometimes good news was the start of another storm. Alexander, the man who rewrote history, around whom this empire orbited like a satellite around a blazing sun, who called himself Zeus's son, who made you lose your language, name and city, might be gone. But what would replace him? Another Greek, an ambitious general, a civil war among those who swore blood oaths with him? You don't know, and that unknowing is what scares you. At least when Alexander lived, you understood the rules, however bent. You knew how to stay silent, bow at the right angle, pronounce his name correctly, and exist in a giant's shadow. But if he's truly dead, who will hold the sword? Who will run the camp? Who will decide if you keep living as an invisible cog or get crushed in a new power struggle? People began whispering about Babylon, where he collapsed from fever, delirious for days, calling for gods, his mother, battles he hadn't yet fought. Some say he was poisoned, others say he died of greed, for land, wine, power, godhood. You don't care how he died. You just watch soldiers argue, officers hide orders, pamphlets written and torn up in the night. No one laughs, no one sings, only silence, the silence of a world about to crack. In your fitful sleep that night, you dreamed of him. Alexander, not in armor, not on horseback, just standing amid Persepolis' ashes, looking at you, smiling sadly, then turning away. You called out, not to beg, but to ask what's left after you. He didn't answer. The next morning, the camp changed shifts early. Some soldiers were ordered to march. Others vanished without a trace. You looked at the footprints in the dirt, thick, chaotic, as if the whole camp was fleeing the question. If Alexander's dead, who are we? For you, it's not just about power, it's about meaning. All you endured, lost, suffered. Was it for one man, or a man-shaped illusion? If he's dead, who were your wounds for? The love you were forbidden, the name you lost, the home that burned. For what, or for nothing? You fear the news is false, because if he's alive, there's still structure, however wrong, however painful. But if it's true, you fear more, because everything could explode. And you know in chaos, people like you, no rank, no weapon, no name in any history, are the ones crushed lowest. So you stand silent in the camp, hearing rumors spread like odorless smoke, wondering, is this the end, or just the prelude to another tragedy, where your role remains a silent shadow, unable to leave the stage. Alexander is truly dead, no longer a rumor, no longer whispered in markets or camps. Now it's an official decree, hosted by soldiers on camp poles in two scripts, Greek and Babylonian, no Persian. You stand before the goatskin notice, reading one word, guessing three, but the commander's face says enough. Everything is changing. Again, when a sun goes out, the sky doesn't brighten, it cracks, and now the empire is splitting like a floor in an old clay pot, silent, unseen, then shattering. Alexander left no heir, only generals, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, Lysimachus, each claiming a piece of the empire, each believing they deserve more, each carrying a fragment of the myth-made man's legacy. But legacies don't divide evenly. They're cut, seized, torn like a wounded beast among starving dogs. And you? What are you among these beasts? Prey, a stage, a map under their feet. You live in a land divided 3 times in one moon's cycle. This week, Seleucid soldiers demand your grain. Next week, Ptolemaic troops burn the storehouse for disloyal locals. The week after, another army, whose you don't know, recruits with swords at throats. In 3 months, you're forced to swear loyalty to 4 kings, change coinage 3 times, and pay taxes 6 times. They don't care who you are, where you're from, which gods you follow, whose banner you once lived under. They care only if you deliver enough rice, have strong sons to conscript, or dare resist. And if not, no matter. There are thousands like you, nameless, silent, replaceable. You thought Alexander's death would let you breathe. Now you see, you just trade masters. Not from chains to freedom, but from gilded shackles to worn rope. Same choke, different hands. Your friends? One's conscripted into some army calling itself just. Another's taken as a tax slave, hauling stone for a fortress far by the sea. One's killed for arguing with a guard over a curfew. He didn't understand. You don't recall his face clearly. You just remember at his burial, no one cried. Crying is exhausting and dangerous. The children no longer learn prayers. They learn to bow to soldiers, say yes sir in 3 languages, and watch their parents worry without asking why. You look at them, heart torn between pity and despair, because you know, if the last generation was burned by fire, this one is being slowly forged by silence, and you keep living. Mornings, you check if you're being sent to another province. Noon, you work, trying to recall which faction runs the camp today. Nights, you clasp hands in the new way, pray to a new god, not from faith but fear. Each day is a game you're not dealt into. You just sit, watching others flip cards, hoping the next one isn't your death. You're the game, not the player. And day by day you fade, not in mirrors, but in your own memory. You don't clearly recall what Persepolis looked like whole. Don't remember your mother's voice calling your old name. Don't recall the first prayer you learned. And that scares you more than any army, because when someone forgets who they are, no ruler is needed. They become their own subject. The new kings fight to claim the map, but for you, the map has no road home, only crossroads, all leading to new cuts. You were once Persian. Now what are you? A survivor, a shadow, a pawn played and left, scattered on the board, waiting for someone's hand to pick it up. But you're still here, breathing, walking, remembering, even if just fragments. And when night falls, you whisper something. Only you understand. I outlived even those who wore crowns. And sometimes, that's enough. You no longer know exactly how old you are. Papers were burned, carved stones with your name, chiseled away. And those who remembered your birthday died in a conscription wave 10 years ago. You measure your age by particularly harsh winters, rainless dry seasons, raids that forced the whole village into caves for 3 days. You know you're old when you wake without needing a rooster's crow, just the ache in your back. You know you're old when children call you grandfather, without respect, just a quiet acknowledgement that you belong to a time gone by. But one thing doesn't age: war. It stays young, swift, breathing steadily, like a wild dog stalking prey at the camp's edge. It changes armor, swaps flags, puts new symbols on helmets, but its essence never shifts. It comes, destroys, kills, leaves and leaves behind walking corpses like you. You survived Alexander's reign, the empire's division, wars between generals, between successor kingdoms, between those speaking the same tongue, but driven by different greeds. Each new king came with new promises, stability, peace, order, and each brought more blood. Sometimes you thought war was a new god, invisible, unnamed, but everyone bowed. You work in silence, grow meager crops on land once your mother's pomegranate grove, tend an old goat as aged as you, patch a mud roof, hoping it holds through the first rain. The children grow, not asking why you cough at night, why your scars aren't smooth, why you flinch at hoofbeats. They don't ask because they're used to it. To them, war isn't a surprise. It's the backdrop, the background noise, the air, the bedtime story. You tell them about Persepolis. They don't believe you. You say there was a time Persians spoke a different tongue, wrote a different script, worshipped different gods. They frown. Why? You don't know how to answer. Or rather, you don't want to, because the truth exhausts you. And you're old. Too old to stand straight when saluting the new commander from the west. A man 30 years your junior, who could raise your village, if his breakfast disappoints. You're used to living under someone's shadow, under whips, under orders, under walls, and you think, at least I'm alive. But each passing year, you wonder what living is, when your memories blur, when your voice is too faint to be heard, when you write your name on the wall, in charcoal, to remember you existed. Once, lying by the fire, wind whistling through wall cracks, hearing soldiers train outside, you thought, maybe I'm not old. War has just lived too long, and if it lives forever, you, a human with one life, will always be a spectator, never the author. You once dreamed of a home, now you just want soft earth to lie on. Once dreamed your children would learn Persian script, now you hope they survive the cold. Once dreamed you'd see the sacred fire again, now you pray the kitchen fire doesn't die. You age, your skin wrinkles, your back hunches, your name is miscalled, but you still remember. Not everything, just enough. Enough to know who you are, enough to know you lived, not gloriously, not loudly, but long enough to see war repeat like a song off key. And sometimes you think, if I live to next season, I'll tell someone, anyone, that there was a man who lived through 3 empire shifts, saw a city burn, and still remembers the smell of his mother's barley bread. That alone. Maybe that's the only way war doesn't fully win, and you whisper it into the wind, hoping it hears. That night, there's no moon, only the flickering glow of a small wood fire in the corner of the makeshift tent you share with your son and 3 grandchildren. Wind howls through the gaps, making the cloth door flap like an unquiet old soul. You lie on a mat, joints creaking, wrapped in a patched blanket, knees drawn up against the cold seeping from the ground. Your youngest grandchild, a 6-year-old boy with eyes just like his mother's, tugs your blanket and says, "Tell us a story, Grandpa." An old one. You look into his eyes, slowly sit up, clear your throat. The other 2 scoot closer, waiting. You start, voice hoarse, each word scraping a barely healed wound. You tell of Persepolis, a city with stone columns taller than palms, floors inlaid with jade, roofs of white limestone reflecting the sun like mirrors. You tell of festival days when the city hung lanterns. Everyone wore their best, walking hours to reach the fire temple. You tell of your father, who carved cuneiform on stone, teaching you to trace ancestors' names with your fingertips. You tell of the morning you woke, knowing war had truly come, that Alexander was no longer a name on merchants' lips, but hoofbeats you heard pounding. You tell of the fire that turned your home, your city, your memories to ash. The children sit still at first, eyes wide, but when you say Persepolis, the eldest frowns, asking, "Did you really live there? Why hasn't anyone told us?" You pause, looking at him slowly. Then you say, "Because no one remembers." The youngest furrows his brow, turning to his brother. "What's Persepolis?" The older one shrugs. "I think he means those broken columns by the grain store on the hill. They call it the strange place." You smile sadly. "That was my world's center." The kids glance at each other. One giggles. Another says, "No way, that dusty stone place." You want to snap, to shout they know nothing. But then you see their eyes Eyes of children, born in a time when war is normal, loss routine, ruins everyday scenery. They don't mock you out of malice. They just can't imagine a world more beautiful, because they've never seen one. You keep telling, slower, trying to make them see, about streets aglow with oil lamps, the festival music from the palace, the smell of New Year's bread, letters handwritten, sealed with beeswax, sent from distant provinces to loved ones. But their eyes wander. One yawns, another peeks through a wall gap at patrolling guards. The youngest pulls his hand from yours, curling into his brother. You understand, it's not your storytelling. The era you describe is gone. It doesn't live in collective memory. No one but you names the old streets correctly. No one remembers the scent of heated white jade. No one teaches kids to pronounce the old gods' names. They grow up in ruins, eat with hands, call Alexander the Unifier, and think old Persian script is quirky drawings. No one uses. You tell a bit more, just to finish. Then lie back, turning from them, staring at the shadowed wall. Soon you hear the kids whisper, then drift to sleep. But you lie awake, gazing at the tent ceiling, as if finding stars you once knew by name. You wonder if no one believes your stories, if no one remembers, were they real? Maybe memory isn't what happened, but what's retold. And if listeners don't believe, what is the teller? You have no answer, only a heart beating slowly, a voice breaking when trying to hold on to something long gone. You pull the blanket to your chest, close your eyes, and whisper, this time not to anyone, but to yourself. I lived there. I loved, I lost, and I remembered. The morning after, as the sun hasn't yet crested the eastern hill, you sit up, legs numb from the cold night, shoulders aching, as they have every morning for 20 years. The children still sleep, limbs tangled like young roots sprawling in dry earth. You watch them silently, thinking of the stories you told, stories they don't believe, don't understand, don't find necessary. But then you glance at the tent's corner, where the youngest, unconsciously, has scratched a mark in charcoal on the wall. A curve, a line, a dot. It's not Greek, not Babylonian. It's an old Persian letter, lonely, frail, but still there. And you realize the Persians never vanished. They just changed names. You were once Ardashir, then called Ari, then Aristos. Now no one uses your name, just old man. But you still hear your true name echo in your mind when they call you wrong. You once wrote cuneiform. Now no one reads it, no one carves it, but you still etch it on the inside of your walking stick with a dull knife. Tiny symbols strung together, unseen by anyone but you. You once spoke Old Persian, recited Ferdowsi's poetry, heard your grandmother tell myths in a voice drawn out like incense smoke. Now you speak Greek more fluently, know greetings in 3 languages, know when to stay silent. But when you pray in secret, you use the old voice, call forbidden gods, think in the old rhythms. You were once a citizen of a sprawling empire, then became a subject, an exile in your own land. But you never surrendered. You live, not by fire, but by its embers. You're what remains, unnoticed, unwritten in books, but still here, like a seed in dry earth, not sprouting, but not dead. Empires change names, kings change thrones, temples change statues, soldiers change flags. But you're the undercurrent, the whisper through generations, the glance shared in a crowd that says we're still here. Persians are no longer called Persians, now they're satraps, Seleucid subjects, citizens of a new kingdom, but they still bake barley bread the old way, hang onion bundles by doors to ward off evil, light a small candle on the first of the month without anyone asking why. They speak a new tongue but quietly teach their children secret words, words not in books, but carrying a lost world. Some child will grow up and ask, why do we speak 2 languages? And someone will answer, one is to survive, the other is to remember who we are. You don't expect the children to rebuild Persepolis. No one can. But you hope one day they'll find a pottery shard, a symbol, a carved poem, and realize they aren't starting from nothing. They aren't the first children of this land. They have roots, and those roots are called Persian, not a nation, but a memory. You don't need anyone to call you by your right name anymore, but you need someone to know you had one. and that people like you never vanished. They just changed names to live, like a river shifting course but still flowing, like a fire doused but still smoking, like a language banned but whispered through generations. The Persians didn't disappear. They changed names, voices, forms, and wait for the day to be called by their own tongue again. And you, the oldest in the tent, are the silent bridge for that. Not with grand speeches, but by still living, still remembering, still telling, even if no one believes. If you were a woman in that time, your story wouldn't just be an erased epic, but a cut so deep, no one bothers to mention it. Too painful, too shameful, too ordinary. In every empire that changed hands, every fortress that fell, every dynasty that rose and crumbled, women like you were the first to be taken, claimed, silenced. When Persepolis burned, people counted fallen columns, lost libraries, smashed idols, but no one counted the women dragged from homes, clothes torn, belonging to men in new emblemed armor. You might have been a potter's daughter, a market stall keeper, or a water bearer for the temple, but when Macedonian soldiers kicked in your door, you were just it, a war prize, a tradable trophy, a tool to intimidate or keep, if obedient. And then you were silenced, because the men around you, those who once bowed to the old king, didn't know what to do. They didn't dare look at you, didn't dare ask, didn't dare remember. They feared you'd remind them of what society wanted to ignore. You were married, not with dowries, but by a soldier's word. A man said you were his wife. So you were, no ceremony, no vows, no one asked if you wanted it. You lived in his tent, cleaned his things, bore his children, and each night stared at the ceiling, wondering your own name. You couldn't worship old gods anymore, couldn't keep your family name, couldn't dress like your mother did. Everything had to fit the new civilization, one that called you Eastern woman, with leers and lustful smirks. You bore a daughter, everyone said, good, not a burden. You bore a son, they said, at least it's new blood. You looked at your child, unsure whether to rejoice or grieve. It was yours, but carried the name of the man who claimed you, and you still had to love it, because it was all you had left. Other women vanished, some died of disease, some ended themselves, some were sold far away, not for profit, but to keep the house quiet. Each harvest season, a few stopped returning to the market. People said they probably followed soldiers, but you knew. They fell into the void history never writes. And you, if luckier, survived, grew old, but your story went untold. Tell your daughter. She covers her ears. Tell your grandchildren. They shake their heads. Old stories, grandma. Tell others. They say, forget and live. But how do you forget when your body is a map of war, when every stretch mark, every crack in your heart proves you were treated like soil, plowed, tilled, claimed, abandoned? If you're a woman, you didn't just lose a homeland, but the right to mourn it. No one writes your history. No one carves your name on stone. No one builds your statue. Your mother of, wife of, girl from the old village, maid in the camp, shadow at the general's feet. And if you die, they say, an old woman, but you know, you're a witness. You heard the city fall, heard blood spill in the night, heard yourself call for your mother in vain, and still survived. You don't need anyone to affirm it. You just need someone to listen. But no one does, because in war, women have no voice, only bodies to endure. But you still live, still bake bread for your children, still teach the little ones to hide seeds in their skirt hems, still secretly light ancestral fires with wicks hidden in bread crusts. And in that silence, you're a rebellion no army foresaw. You don't fight, don't shout, but you remember, and you pass it on. Through hands, eyes, flesh. You don't need to be a heroine. You just need to be a survivor and a witness to what the world tries to forget. If you're a woman, your story is fiercer, but also tougher. Because while men kill to build empires, you preserve roots with blood, milk, and unbreakable silence. If you were a slave in that time, you didn't just lack the right to tell this story. You didn't even have a story. You had no name, only nicknames given by masters. Bigfoot, mute goat, hunched back, or simply, hey. You had no birthday, no homeland, no lineage. Everything you once had was taken with your freedom when you were sold, captured, or worse, born in a dark tent, child of a mother who didn't know where she came from either. You didn't choose a trade. You did what others refused. Worked from before dawn until after the roosters slept. Worked without asking why. Didn't dare complain. Couldn't afford to fall ill. Couldn't afford to err. 1 mistake meant a beating. 2 meant starvation. 3 meant you vanished. Someone led you away, never to return, and no one asked. Swept palace stone floors, hands swollen red, head bowed, as if it were fate. You carried grain sacks across mountains, mud up to your waist, shoes torn with no one to mend them. You hauled water from rivers to camps in cold, so bitter your teeth chattered like dropped beads. Each step you took, the clink of chains mocked like the laughter of whoever signed your capture. You saw things you shouldn't have, banquet scenes, plots to kill kings, an officer collapsing after a drunken night, but you couldn't tell. Slaves don't get stories. Your mouth opened only for orders, to chew when fed, to scream when beaten, or to stay silent when made, sport for those drunk on power. You knew the smell of blood, not from battlefields, but your own back. You knew hunger so deep you'd eat dirt. You knew despair, not through tears, but through having no emotions left to cry. And worst of all, you knew no one would remember you. No one would name you in histories. No one would build your statue. No one would credit you for hauling supplies for a victorious campaign. No one knew you sang lullabies to a child in a banned tongue. No one knew you carved your father's name on a wood scrap hidden behind the house, burned when the master moved. You had no grave when you died, just a pit, no funeral, just disappearance. But you still existed, in every meal you cooked but didn't eat, in every wall you built but couldn't enter, in every road you cleared with bare hands for those calling themselves lords to ride over. And though you couldn't tell, you were an essential part of this story. You kept the machine running. You were the base of the tower, everyone looked up to, but never down at. You were where all the unspoken was buried, sighs, broken songs, memories living only in swollen eyes and calloused hands. You didn't need miracles, didn't demand justice. You just wanted to be seen, to breathe fully for a day, to be called by a proper name. But that time gave you none of those. It gave you chains, verbal orders, and a silent death. If you were a slave, you didn't get to tell this story. But maybe, just maybe, the one writing it heard your breath, saw you pass by, knew that without you, history couldn't have happened as it did. And maybe, in this way, your voice, though late, is still heard, not because you asked, but because you deserved it. You never thought you'd set foot in Alexandria, the city named for the man who burned your homeland, the man you could never decide whether to hate, fear, or see as a living nightmare. But time pushed you here, a broken journey, a drifted life, a grandson joining the army. You followed, not as a traveler, but as an old shadow of an old empire, passing through a new port. Alexandria dazzles with marble light, statues blending Egyptian and Greek styles, long eyes, straight noses, square chins, as if gods and mortals slept together and birthed a hybrid lineage. The city smells of sea salt, mixed with papyrus and wet mortar. They say it holds the world's greatest library, a sky-piercing lighthouse, markets buzzing like ants. But you don't go to those places. You go to one, Alexander's tomb. No one calls him Iskandar here. No one says conqueror. No one whispers of Persepolis. Here, he's the great emperor, the builder, the immortal. The tomb sits at the city's heart, like a stone heartbeat, guarded day and night, surrounded by white columns and fresh-dried flowers replaced weekly. You stand before it, not too close, not too far, like someone facing the grave of a person they're unsure whether to forgive. Some weep, some kneel, some touch the tomb's wall and whisper wishes. You do nothing, just look. You see Greek letters carved in gold on black stone, see reliefs of him on horseback, pointing east, leading an army like Apollo descended. See Alexandria's people, young, old, soldiers, merchants, pass by and nod in reverence. Then you think of all that's not in the stone. No burning Persepolis, no wife torn from her husband, no name erased from lists, no banned language, no nights you dreamed of fire and woke to the smell of singed hair, no friend conscripted and dead without a body, no face of the child you never taught Persian, no old prayers, no look in your eyes when Alexander passed, laurel-crowned, never glancing back. You look at that tomb, tall, bright, meticulously guarded, and see a void larger than it, a gap in memory, where myths are built by snuffing out the memories of people like you. You don't hate Alexander, but you can't love him, can't revere him, can't believe all he did was divine destiny. Because if gods chose him, they also chose to burn you to ash. You stand there a long time, until the crowd shifts its worship, until the sunlight tilts west. Then you turn away. No bow, no prayer, no keepsake, because you don't need a tomb to remember Alexander. You need only the scar on your back, the lost old path, the smell of burnt rice your mother once cooked in a home now gone. And you know this tomb will stand long, very long. But one day, it may fall, while you, and those like you, will linger in the wind, the earth, the dreams of children with unknown origins. You came to look, then walked away, because death doesn't need to be seen to be understood. And the one who truly needs a tomb is you, not the man with a city named after him. Suppose a god, not Ahura Mazda, not Zeus, not any deity you were forced to worship or secretly prayed to, but some being outside time offers you a golden bowl containing the greatest question of your life. If you could choose again, would you be reborn into that same existence? The life you struggled through with layers of names, masters, and losses. The life where you watched your city burn, your loved ones vanish, your name miscalled, your language twisted beyond recognition. You think of the starving years, your blistered feet, your gnarled hands, the cold eyes of guards, the nights you held your child, unsure if there'd be grain to cook. Come morning, you think of the shame of being asked your homeland, but not daring to answer truly, of your mother's screams as she was dragged from home, of the silence in your father's eyes as flames consumed the palace, of the handfuls of ash you gathered, the ancient letters you carved on stones and hid under your bed. But then you also think of the times you saw a child sleep peacefully, if only for a night, of the time you secretly gave half your bread to an old beggar and received a genuine smile, of the day you saw a flower bloom in rubble and thought, it didn't need permission to live, of the moment you touched the wall of Alexander's tomb and knew you didn't need to believe in myths because you were the truth, of the evening you told stories to your grandchildren and saw a spark in the youngest's eyes that no history book could capture, of the instant you realized surviving, however small, is a form of resistance. The god would ask, would you live that life again? No crown, no songs, no statues. And you, with all your scars, with a heart once choked, with memories no one wants to hear, would answer in a trembling but firm voice, not because you loved suffering, but because you understand that without that pain, you wouldn't know the value of each sigh you were allowed to breathe. Without that darkness, you wouldn't grasp the meaning of a single spark. And if someone asked, why choose a small life among giants claiming immortality? You'd say, because they died and got statues. I'm still here to tell. You may not have chosen anything in that old life, not your homeland, not your era, not your circumstances. But if you could choose again, you'd choose to live, to love, to see, to remember, however fragile it all was. Because in a world where everyone wants to be the victor, you were the witness. And nothing is stronger than the memory of someone who survived, to tell what every powerful figure tried to forget. If reborn, you wouldn't choose to be a king, not a soldier, not a god. You'd choose to be you, a small person, living through an empire's dying days, still holding something no one could take, memory, language, and a heart that refused to vanish. You'd live that life again, not because it was easy, but because it was real. History will write of Alexander, in gold, in stone, in the language of victors, by the hands of those who never lived as you did. They'll write of a young king, extraordinary, conquering the old world, leading armies from the Danube to the Indus, spreading civilization to lands they called barbaric. They'll paint him riding Bucephalus against a fiery sky, spear like lightning, eyes seeing beyond mortal reach. They'll carve his name on columns, name cities after him, make him a statue, a god, a symbol. But where are you in those pages? You who swept ashes under divine statues, who carried water to nurture flowers the Greeks planted to bring light to the east, who scrubbed floors where soldiers feasted victory, who collapsed in a tattered tent, clutching a shard of the city that was once an empire's heart, who was forced to forget your name, your language, your ancestors. You're not in the histories, not in the rosters of soldiers, not in the chronicles' tales. You're local, submissive masses, assimilated force. A footnote's gap, or worse, the blank, after an ellipsis. You're the story no one thought worth telling. The ash blown away before the writer picked up the pen. The hand that gathered bricks to rebuild walls after war, but uncredited because history cares only for winners. But you were there. You don't need to be named, because you're the foundation myths stand on. Without you, Alexander couldn't march. Without you, soldiers had no rations. Without you, cities had no roads. Without you, histories had no one to claim as civilized. And so, though your name was erased, you're indispensable, persistent, silent, smoldering, like a fire in the earth, waiting to crack into sound. Every time someone opens a book, reads of grand conquests, epic battles, masterful strategies, courage, the ambition of one man who shook the world, you, unmentioned, are why it all happened. Not because you helped, because you endured. And in that endurance is a strength they don't understand. The strength of a survivor, the strength of a witness who needs no record, the strength of one who knows the truth, though forced to silence. No one may ask how you lived. No one may seek you for interviews, for accounts, for films, but you don't need them to, because you've carved your story where they can't burn it, in the memories of real people, in the wrinkles of your hands, in the lullaby your mother sang, its author long forgotten. You're the unwritten history, but undeniable. History will write of Alexander, but you're the reason there's a history to write. And one day, when the world is quiet enough to hear forgotten whispers, someone will turn those pages, search the darkness, and realize you were the one who kept the era's soul alive, not because you wielded a sword, but because you remained, though no one spoke your name. If you're still alive in history, you are history, not as a grand figure carved in stone or named in books, but as a silent current that never breaks, a fragile thread stitching past to present through the beat of your heart. You, who were forced to forget your name, who whispered prayers in a banned language, who bowed not out of submission, but to survive, are still here, still breathing, still remembering. Your hair may be grey, your back bent, your eyes too dim to read the new words written about civilization, victory, cultural unity. Your mouth may lack the strength to argue, your hands too unsteady to hold a pen, your voice, if it exists, only echoing in the night wind, where children don't bother to listen. But as long as you live, the story isn't over. You are living proof that some things can't be erased by fire, buried by swords, or bent by politics. When you recall Persepolis, your old home, your father writing on stone, your mother baking with fragrant wood, the lover you couldn't keep, the firstborn you buried in the garden behind the camp. When you remember all this without anyone forcing you to, you are a living version of history, needing no papers to certify it. And if you speak, even a single sentence, you're rewriting, not with ink, but with memory. Not with fanfare, but with a truth no one can mimic. Empires came and went. Alexander died. His generals died. Those who built his tomb died. The first historians died. Those who rewrote history died. The language he used diluted. The cities he named changed or abandoned. But you, though your name has changed, your body worn, carry something they can never reclaim. Experience. They had victories. You had consequences. They had glory. You had truth. And that truth lives not in stone columns, but in the ache of your spine each morning, in the hands that still know how to tie grass to light, a fire the old way, in the smell of rice you cook, the bread you knead, the lullaby you sing, though no one recalls its meaning. That truth exists in how you look at strangers, how you choose silence at the right moment, how you keep a stone from your old home in your pocket, unexplained. That truth is you. And so, when someone says, that time is gone, you don't argue, you just smile, because you know history doesn't pass. It changes form, it changes keepers, it hides in people like you, those thought forgotten but quietly holding memories no book can retrieve. And if you're still alive, living small, humble, sometimes silent but never empty, history lives too. It needs no honors, no statues, just to be seen, acknowledged, known as indispensable. History isn't just what happened, it's what echoes. And you left off every map, record, and book are that echo, that resonance. the part no one remembers, but always exists in every brick, every glance, every half-told tale. So if someone asks, did you live in Alexander's time? You won't nod, won't shake your head. You'll just say, I'm the part history didn't write, but that's why I'm truer than it. Because you walked through blood, through ash, through change. You cried, laughed, loved, lost, endured, and still stand. If you're still alive in history, you are history. No need to be told, because you are the telling. No need to be rebuilt, because you never fell. No need to have your name carved, because it's etched in the earth, the wind, the eyes of those who never met you, but carry something unnamed. That's you. You living history, in the form of an ordinary person, not shining, not glorious, but immortal, in a way no one can fathom. The story, if you were a Persian civilian, when Alexander invaded, is not just a journey back to the chaos of ancient history, but a mirror reflecting modern society, especially life in the United States today, where people also live amid vast shifts in culture, power, and identity. In the story, the narrator has no say over their name, language, faith, or loved ones, all dictated by outside forces, by war, by victors. When Persepolis burned, it wasn't just a city that fell, but a cultural memory threatened with erasure. It's a powerful image of identity loss, still happening today, though without swords. In the US, a nation of diversity and change, we have more freedom, but also the risk of dissolving identity if we don't actively preserve it. Maintaining culture, language, memory, and history for each community, immigrants, people of color, Asian Americans, Native Americans, is a quiet but fierce act of resistance, like how Persians secretly taught their children banned words, carved memories on tent walls, kept the fire alive even as embers. The lesson here is never underestimate the power of personal memory, of a small voice, of a retold story. In a society where official history can be rewritten through the lens of power, listening to forgotten stories and retelling them is the true act of history. If you find this story worth remembering, like the memories never carved into history books, please hit subscribe to join me in continuing to hear forgotten voices. Thank you for being here. See you in the next part, where we keep seeking the real history, where those unnamed still live forever.